Welcome to ScaleUp Radio Shorts. I'm Kevin Brent.
And I'm Louise Blunt. We're the originators of Smart 90, and this podcast is brought to you by Smart 90, the 90-day system that keeps business owners focused and following through.
In this show, we dive into the archives of the main ScaleUp Radio podcast. We take the key lessons, themes, and light bulb moments from my full-length guest interviews and distill them down into a quick, actionable discussion to help you scale your business.
Today, we're doing a bit of a compare and contrast. Kevin, you recently had two fantastic but seemingly very different guests on the show, Jeremy Middleton and John Hibbs.
That's right. Jeremy is the CEO of Middleton Enterprises, a family office that invests in private companies. He's also the guy who famously co-founded and successfully exited the massive plumbing and home emergency business HomeServe. John Hibbs, on the other hand, is the CEO and co-founder of Coefficient, an online platform designed to help organizations surface meaningful insights directly from their people, essentially measuring company culture and staff well-being.
At first glance, you've got the quintessential hard-nosed investor and business builder in Jeremy, and the deeply human-centric, culture-focused tech founder in John. But reading through the briefing notes on these interviews, it's fascinating how their philosophies intersect. Let's start with Jeremy. What was the core of his scaling philosophy?
If I had to sum up Jeremy's approach in one word, it would be predictability. He isn't looking for the next Google or Amazon. He's looking for a proven business model. He invests in bricks and mortar businesses like a low-cost gym chain in the northeast of England. He wants to see that an entrepreneur has figured out a model that works, generates cash, and can simply be repeated, opening 4 more sites and then another 4.
And he talks a lot about having a competitive edge, doesn't he? I think a lot of founders get wrapped up in finding a unique selling proposition, USP, that involves some crazy new tech. But Jeremy's definition of a competitive edge is much more grounded.
Completely. He made the brilliant point that a competitive edge might just be understanding your local patch better than the massive national chains. With the gym chain he invested in, they succeeded by targeting a very specific demographic, the extremely keen gym goer, and making the ambiance dark with pumping music and red lights. It doesn't appeal to everyone, but it appeals to their target market more than the generic chain next door. He believes you don't need to please all the people all the time, just some of the people more than anyone else.
That's a great lesson in focus. But it's interesting because Jeremy is heavily focused on the numbers and the structure. In fact, he explicitly told you that the one key role most founders are missing when they try to scale is a finance director.
Yes, he said many action-oriented founders just view an FD as an expensive cost who puts numbers into a different order. But Jeremy learned the hard way in his early plumbing days. They had loads of sales, but were secretly bleeding cash because they didn't have the right management information. Without that data, he says, you simply cannot manage a growing business.
Now let's pivot to John Hibbs, because he is also absolutely obsessed with data, but a completely different kind of data.
Exactly. John's platform Coefficient is built on the premise that a business is simply a group of people working hard to benefit another group of people, the customers. But he notes that the intangibles, things like psychological safety, culture, and whether people feel they are connecting with their colleagues, are incredibly hard to measure.
And because they're hard to measure, business owners often ignore them. John mentioned that while accountants make financial metrics easy to measure, the financial outputs are just lag indicators.
Spot on. We actually discussed some research on the show where we found that only 4% of business owners reported having people measures in their top 5 KPIs. John pointed out that ignoring this is a massive mistake, who cited the global cost of disengaged staff and poor mental health in the workplace, noting that 25% of staff are suffering from some sort of mental health condition right now. If your staff aren't mentally supported, how can they make good decisions or be resilient for your business?
And John learned this through his own failure, didn't he? The story about his personal training business in London is incredible.
It really is. He started JMH Fitness in his 20s and admitted he was terribly naive and had probably the worst business in London. He was struggling for 3 years until one of his clients, an Australian business coach named Les Callis, sat him down.
I love that moment in the interview. Les basically told him, "You're a great personal trainer, I like you, but you are rubbish at running a business."
Yes. And Les offered him free coaching in exchange for free personal training. Les taught him 2 things. Start measuring what's going on to make better decisions. And remember that business is all about people and building relationships. Within 12 months, John had a waiting list, 2 full-time staff, and was making 3 times the money.
Which brings us to the comparison between these two leaders. On the surface, Jeremy is saying, get an FD and look at your cash flow, while John is saying, love your staff and measure their psychological safety. But they are actually saying the exact same thing. You cannot scale what you do not measure.
That is a brilliant way to frame it, Louise. Jeremy wants you to have the financial data so you don't run out of cash. John wants you to have the human data so you don't run out of engaged employees. And interestingly, when I asked Jeremy what the number one thing is that separates successful investments from unsuccessful ones, he didn't say the product. He said the entrepreneur, number one, are they going to remain motivated? Are they going to keep their team together?
So even the hardened investor admits that the people are the ultimate foundation of the business.
Precisely. Jeremy pointed out that hiring great people isn't easy, but you have to be prepared to find them, pay for them, and then give them the headroom and space to work. John takes that a step further with his concept of the monergy flow. He argues that if you nurture your people and provide meaningful connections, it creates a ripple effect. The happy staff go home to create happy families, which create happy communities.
It's so powerful, and I noticed that both guests, despite their different paths, share a deep commitment to giving back and building purpose-driven entities. John talks about creating multi-win vehicles where everyone from the staff to the community benefits. And Jeremy actually set up something called the Molly Project, didn't he?
He did. After his successful exits, Jeremy started buying houses in the northeast of England to provide forever homes for people with autism and learning difficulties. He saw that the state was struggling to provide suitable accommodation for these adults, often leaving a tremendous burden on aging parents. So he used his expertise in property and investment to create a sustainable, practical solution. It's a perfect example of what John Hibbs talks about: business and wealth creation ultimately existing to help other people.
I think there's a massive lesson here for our listeners who are trying to scale. You need both sides of the coin. If you only focus on the culture and the love, as John says, but you don't have Jeremy's predictable business model and cash flow, you'll go out of business.
Yes, as John himself noted, you have to sell something to make money, and all the wealth in the world is created by business and trade. But if you only focus on Jeremy's financial predictability and ignore John's advice to build a tribe of aligned, supported people, your staff will leave, your culture will turn toxic, and you'll eventually fail from the inside out.
Absolutely. By the way, listeners, if you want to know what happens when you let your staff pick their own salaries, you have to go and listen to John's full interview because he actually did that. He also shares an incredible fanboy story about writing an article for a US journal and ending up on a Zoom call with his absolute business hero, former Ford CEO Alan Mulally.
It's a fantastic story. And equally, you have to go back and listen to Jeremy's full interview to hear the dramatic story of how HomeServe was born. They were running a loss, making plumbing business, burning cash, until they completely pivoted their business model to plumbing insurance, selling peace of mind. So when single pivot turned a hole in the ground into a cash spewing machine that eventually entered the FTSE 100.
So many rich lessons in both of those conversations. To wrap us up, what would be your biggest takeaway from comparing these two guests, Kevin?
I think my biggest takeaway is the power of alignment. John's framework for his personal success is ICE, income, control, and equity. He wants a business that gives him those three things while helping the world. So Jeremy's investment firm acts as a junior partner to founders, buying common shares, not loading the business with debt, and aligning their interests completely so they only make money if the founder makes money. Both men have realized that whether you are dealing with your employees or your investors, long-term success only happens when everyone's goals and values are pointing in the exact same direction.
Fantastic. Well, that is all we have time for today on ScaleUp Radio Shorts.
Please do yourself a favor and seek out the full-length interviews with Jeremy Middleton and John Hibbs. You can find them by searching for ScaleUp Radio wherever you like to listen to your podcasts. Make sure you hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes of the main show or these shorts. Because finally, if you're tired of ending the week busy but no further forward, SmartNT might be for you. It's a 90-day execution rhythm with an AI alignment check that keeps your daily focus tied to what actually matters. Try it free at smart90.co.uk. Thanks for listening and keep scaling.